In the marble halls of the federal courthouse, Judge Sarah Chen straightened her robes before entering courtroom 314. After 15 years on the bench, she'd earned a reputation for unwavering integrity, but cases like today's always tested the limits of justice. The high-profile insurance fraud trial of Regina Matthews, CEO of Cornerstone Insurance, had drawn national attention. Regina Matthews had transformed Cornerstone from a modest regional provider into a billion-dollar empire. But beneath the polished corporate exterior lay accusations of systematic fraud, denied claims, and destroyed lives. The prosecution claimed Matthews had orchestrated a vast scheme to deny legitimate healthcare claims, leading to countless deaths and bankruptcies among vulnerable policyholders. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Rodriguez sat at the prosecution table, his dark suit crisp despite the early hour. He'd spent months building this case, knowing the deck was stacked against him. Matthews's crimes had devastated working families across the country, leaving elderly retirees without vital medications and children without essential treatments while she lived in luxury. The defense table remained conspicuously empty as Judge Chen checked her watch. Matthews was already 20 minutes late. When the courtroom doors finally opened, Regina Matthews swept in, phone pressed to her ear. Her platinum hair and designer suit, a stark contrast to the austere courtroom. Her lead counsel, Diana Foster, followed close behind, looking uncomfortable as her client continued her phone conversation. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Sarah Chen," the bailiff announced. The entire courtroom stood, except Matthews, who continued her call while lounging in her chair. "Ms. Matthews," Judge Chen's measured voice cut through the tension. "In this courtroom we observe certain protocols. One of those is standing when the judge enters. Another is refraining from phone calls during proceedings." Matthews ended her call but remained seated, fixing Chen with a look of barely concealed disdain. "My apologies, Your Honor," she drawled, making the title sound like an insult. "I was handling rather important business matters." "More important than showing respect for this court?" Matthews smirked. "That depends on one's perspective, doesn't it?" Judge Chen leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes holding Matthews' gaze. "Let me adjust your perspective, Ms. Matthews. You're facing federal charges that could put you away for 30 years. Your business matters can wait. Stand up." For a long moment, Matthews didn't move. The tension in the courtroom grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, with deliberate slowness, she rose to her feet. "Thank you," Chen said. "You may be seated. Now, let's proceed with the arraignment." As Marcus Rodriguez began presenting the charges, a court officer quietly approached the bench, slipping Judge Chen a folded note. She read it discreetly. "Watch your back. Matthews owns half the state medical board. Evidence has a way of disappearing in her cases." Chen's expression didn't change as she tucked the note into her robes. She'd suspected as much. Dr. James Sullivan, the medical board's chief investigator handling evidence in this case, had a reputation for being susceptible to persuasion, but suspicions weren't proof, and Chen knew she'd need to proceed carefully. The morning proceeded with a series of legal motions. Diana Foster, streamlined in an expensive charcoal suit, argued skillfully for dismissal based on procedural grounds. Rodriguez countered with passionate precision, laying out the devastating impact of Matthews's schemes on families across the country. During a brief recess, Chen watched through her chamber windows as reporters swarmed Matthews on the courthouse steps. The CEO played to the cameras with practiced ease. "This is a witch hunt," Matthews declared, flashing her perfect white teeth. "Judge Chen clearly has an agenda. I've faced tougher judges than her, and I'm still here. The truth will prevail." This was just the beginning, Chen knew. The real battle for justice was about to unfold, and she would need all her experience and determination to ensure the truth emerged victorious. It's too late. The tension in courtroom 314 had reached a fever pitch by afternoon. As Rodriguez presented evidence of denied claims and falsified medical reviews, Matthews maintained her air of indifference, occasionally whispering to her attorney or checking her phone. Back in chambers, Marcus Rodriguez knocked on Chen's door, his face drawn with worry. "Your Honor, do you have a moment?" "Come in, counselor. What's troubling you?" Our key witness, Dr. Elizabeth Turner from Cornerstone's Medical Review Board. She's getting cold feet. Someone's been following her, taking photos of her children at school. The police say there's nothing they can do. Chen's jaw tightened. Of course they don't. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Mr. Rodriguez, this case will test everything we believe about justice. Matthews doesn't just break laws, she thinks they don't apply to her. People like that are dangerous precisely because they believe their money puts them above the system. How do we fight that? Marcus asked, frustration evident in his voice, perilously toward remote control. As soon as the people in the room turned, step at a time, build your case methodically, document everything, trust no one outside your immediate team. And remember, people like Matthews often plant the seeds of their own destruction through their arrogance. Later that afternoon, Matthews sauntered toward the judge's bench during a recess. Don't worry too much about this case, Judge, she called back. I'm sure we can come to an understanding. The implied threat hung in the air as Chen gathered her papers. That evening, in her modest home study, Chen reviewed the day's transcripts. Her wife, Michelle, brought her a cup of green tea, her presence a quiet comfort. Tough case? She asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd been by Chen's side through countless battles, from her days as a struggling law student to her appointment to the federal bench. Matthews thinks she's above the law, Chen replied, sipping her tea. She's used to buying her way out of trouble, manipulating the system. The way she looked at me today, like I was beneath her, like my position meant nothing. Michelle squeezed her shoulder. Then show her what real justice looks like. Chen covered her wife's hand with hers, drawing strength from her support. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she allowed herself to remember why she'd become a judge in the first place. Not for power or prestige, but to ensure that justice truly was blind. Blind to wealth, to influence, and yes, to race and gender. As night deepened outside her window, Chen continued working, preparing for the battles ahead. In her mind, she could already see the forces aligning against her. Matthews' money, corrupt medical boards, manipulated media. But she'd faced impossible odds before and prevailed. This case would be her biggest test yet, but Sarah Chen had never been one to back down from a fight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Judge Chen slept soundly, secure in her purpose. The law was on her side, and in her courtroom at least, justice would prevail. Diana Foster strode into Judge Chen's chambers early the next morning, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Your Honor, I've filed several motions regarding evidence admissibility, she announced, placing a thick stack of papers on the desk. We have serious concerns about the chain of custody for key medical records. Chen picked up the first motion, scanning its contents. Ms. Foster, you're challenging the admissibility of virtually every piece of evidence the prosecution has gathered. With good reason, Foster replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. We believe proper procedures weren't followed. Dr. Sullivan's department has already acknowledged mishandling several key patient files. As if on cue, Marcus Rodriguez burst into the chambers, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, Dr. Turner's testimony, all of it, has vanished from the evidence locker. Dr. Sullivan claims it was an administrative error. But this is the third piece of evidence that's mysteriously disappeared this week. Foster's smile widened. Sounds like the prosecution needs to keep better track of their materials. Across town, in Matthews's palatial mansion, a different scene was unfolding. Regina Matthews lounged by her infinity pool, sipping expensive champagne while Dr. James Sullivan paced nervously on the marble tiles. Relax, James, Matthews drawled. Everything's going according to plan. The evidence is gone, and that self-righteous judge can't do anything about it. Sullivan wiped sweat from his forehead. It's not that simple, Regina. Chen's not like the others. She's asking questions, demanding documentation. My staff is getting nervous. That's why I pay you so well, Matthews replied, reaching for a manila envelope stuffed with cash. Another 100,000 to keep your department cooperative. And James, make sure our friend from the medical board doesn't make it to the witness stand. Neither noticed the discreet security camera capturing their interaction, its red light blinking silently in the shadow of a palm tree. The footage would soon find its way to an unexpected ally. Someone close to Matthews who'd finally had enough. As back in the courtroom, the power struggle intensified. Foster filed motion after motion, each designed to stall proceedings and wear down the prosecution. Judge Chen maintained her composure, methodically addressing each challenge while keeping the trial moving forward. Matthews' behavior grew increasingly provocative. She arrived late each day, barely acknowledging the court's authority. During testimony, she made a show of checking her phone or whispering loudly to her attorneys. Each small act of defiance tested Chen's patience, but the judge refused to take the bait. "Mrs. Matthews," Chen finally addressed her during an afternoon session, "your continuous disregard for court procedures is noted. Should this behavior continue, you will be held in contempt." Matthews looked up from her phone, smirking. "My apologies, Your Honor. Sometimes I forget who's supposed to be in charge here." That evening, Marcus Rodriguez waited in a dimly lit parking garage, checking his watch nervously. Dr. Elizabeth Turner had agreed to meet him secretly after receiving threats at her home. As footsteps echoed through the concrete structure, he turned to see Turner approaching, her face pale with fear, tearing again from the same area in the city. "Don't worry, my lord. They're not going to hurt anyone." "They were at my daughter's school today," she whispered, hands shaking. "Two men, just watching. My husband wants me to drop out of the case." Marcus's heart sank. Turner's testimony about Matthews's systemic denial of life-saving treatments was crucial to their case. "Elizabeth, we can protect you. The FBI has a witness protection program." "The FBI?" She laughed bitterly. "Matthews has people everywhere." "I'm sorry, Marcus, I can't risk my family." She turned and hurried away, leaving Rodriguez alone with his crumbling case. Meanwhile, Judge Chen worked late in her chambers, reviewing case law for precedents that might help her navigate the challenges ahead. A soft knock interrupted her research. "Come in," she called, expecting her clerk. Instead, a young medical board investigator entered, carefully closing the door behind him. "Judge Chen, I'm Dr. Michael Santos. I need to tell you something about Dr. Sullivan and Ms. Matthews." Chen leaned forward, interest piqued. "Go on." "Last week I was assigned to the records department. I saw Dr. Sullivan remove files from the Matthews case. He didn't follow protocols, didn't sign anything out. When I questioned it, he said it was special handling. I reported it to Internal Affairs, but nothing happened." "Why are you telling me this?" Chen asked. "Because my mother was a judge," Santos replied. "She taught me that justice matters more than politics. I can't prove anything, but I thought you should know." After Santos left, Chen found another anonymous note on her desk. "Check the denied claims from 20212023. The truth is in the numbers." Part 3 of The Insurance Judge. Full 1,000 words. The next morning brought a devastating revelation that would change the course of the trial. Victoria Matthews, Regina Matthews' estranged sister and former chief financial officer of Cornerstone Insurance, appeared in Judge Chen's chambers carrying a laptop and years of accumulated evidence against her sister. "Your Honor," Victoria began, her voice steady despite her obvious tension. "I've been documenting Regina's activities for the past 5 years. What started as financial fraud evolved into something far more sinister. She wasn't just denying claims, she was purposefully targeting the most vulnerable patients, knowing they couldn't afford legal battles." Judge Chen studied the woman before her, noting the familiar determination that seemed to run in the Matthews family, though expressed quite differently. "Why come forward now, Ms. Matthews?" Ms. Hallowell spoke up, and her voice was even, and Victoria's professional composure cracked slightly. "Because last month, I discovered Regina had begun targeting children's hospitals. She created a new policy algorithm specifically designed to deny experimental treatments for terminal illnesses. When I confronted her, she laughed and said, 'Dead kids don't file appeals.' The evidence Victoria brought was damning. Video recordings of board meetings showed Matthews openly discussing strategies to delay claims until patients died. Spreadsheets detailed the cost-benefit analysis of letting terminally ill patients die versus paying their claims. Internal emails revealed systematic intimidation of doctors who tried to advocate for their patients. When the recordings were played in court, the transformation in Matthews was remarkable. Her carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing glimpses of the ruthlessness Victoria had described. "You treacherous bitch," she snarled at her sister during one particularly damaging revelation. "You think you can destroy everything I've built? I made this company what it is." "Ms. Matthews," Judge Chen's voice cut through the outburst, "control yourself or be removed from my courtroom." Marcus Rodriguez methodically entered each piece of evidence into the record. Forged medical reviews, fabricated denial reasons, and most disturbingly, a bonus structure that rewarded claims adjusters for finding ways to deny life-saving treatments. The documentation painted a picture not just of fraud, but of calculated cruelty. During a brief recess, Dr. Sullivan attempted to flee the country, only to be intercepted by FBI agents at the airport. He quickly agreed to cooperate, revealing how Matthews had systematically corrupted the state medical board through a combination of bribes, blackmail, and threats. "She has a system," Sullivan testified, his arrogance replaced by fear. "She finds someone with a weakness, gambling debts, sick family member, secret affair, and exploits it. Once you're in, there's no way out. She owns you. I watched her destroy doctors who refused to cooperate, witnessed her orchestrate accidents for whistleblowers. She made it clear, either play by her rules or suffer the consequences." Victoria's testimony continued, revealing the intricate web of corruption her sister had woven. Regina didn't just build a company. She created an empire based on human suffering. She would personally review cases involving expensive treatments, looking for ways to deny them. She called it cost optimization, but it was really just playing God with people's lives. The testimony was interrupted by an urgent message. Someone had broken into the evidence room at the federal courthouse. Several key files were missing, and a small fire had been started, triggering the sprinkler system. Though most evidence was saved, the message was clear. Matthews still had reach, even from within the courtroom. That evening, Judge Chen received a series of photographs in her personal email. They showed her wife Michelle teaching her art class, their daughter Amy at soccer practice, and their elderly dog being walked by the neighborhood pet sitter. The message was simple: even federal judges have families. Chen immediately contacted the FBI, but she refused to be intimidated. The next morning, she ordered additional security for all participants in the trial, including the jury. "This court will not be swayed by threats or intimidation," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Matthews's response was swift and calculated. She launched a media campaign questioning Chen's impartiality. Conservative news outlets ran stories suggesting the judge was biased against successful women executives. Social media filled with carefully crafted narratives, painting Matthews as a victim of judicial overreach. But Victoria Matthews wasn't finished. She revealed one final piece of evidence that would prove impossible to ignore. Recordings of her sister discussing the removal of problematic witnesses in previous cases. "Make it look natural," Matthews had said. "A car accident, a home invasion gone wrong. Just make sure there's nothing to connect it back to us." As the day's session ended, Judge Chen noticed something different in the courtroom atmosphere. The swagger in Matthews' step had diminished, replaced by a nervous energy that suggested she was finally realizing the gravity of her situation. The truth was emerging, and not even her money and influence could stop it now.